there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a run through the market here for you though. So 20th of May to date, that's the window we're looking at. Shares in Kenya's loss-making carrier have actually gone up by a fair bit, 13.2%. But yesterday we analysed the proposal to renationalise the firm, and that proposal by Kenyan legislators, we understand today, is one which the Minister in charge of Transport is backing as well. Kenya's bourse, however, not doing particularly well. It hit another multi-year low, 2647.28 points. The value destruction train just rolls on. This index is down 6.5% so far in 2019. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll have in-depth analysis of the South African State of the Nation address. Amid soaring tensions, the US president makes a U-turn after ordering an attack on Iran. And this shop is spicing up things for locals and tourists in South Africa's coastal city of Durban. Right then, quite a bit to get through tonight. But let's start in South Africa, where the authorities will be giving the embattled state power utility Afcon a significant portion of the $16 billion in essentially bailout cash that it needs to remain solvent, more or less up front. President Cyril Ramaphosa made that announcement during his State of the Nation address in Parliament in Cape Town on Thursday. The financial support comes in the wake of a three-year $4.8 billion bailout from South African taxpayers. However, it's predicted that this decision will mount pressure on the government's tighter and tighter finances. The cash-strapped company is laden with more than $30 billion in debt. It is also battling a shortage of generation capacity that threatens to derail the government's plans in order to stimulate economic growth and output. So then let's analyse what essentially came out of the State of the Nation address. Angelo Fick is the Director of Research at Awal Socio-Economic Research Institute in Johannesburg. He joins us now live for a lot more analysis on this. Angelo, what was your assessment of the content in Mr. Ramaphosa's speech? What were his hits and misses?
So I think what was important in the speech was the idea of reintroducing a vision of the future which had been missing from South Africa for a very long time, in not just politics but in everyday life. This idea that 10 years from now, that 25 years from now, a very different South Africa is being envisioned. And that, I think, was missing for very many people, because while the National Development Plan did project some ideas about 2030 and what South Africa should achieve, it didn't really concretize for people the kind of society that they would want to live in. And I think that that is an important return to mark at this pivotal moment, 25 years after the change from apartheid totalitarianism to a democratic South Africa. What is missing, and what I think many people will want to hear, is the ironing out of the kinks in the detail, that there may be some contradictions between the desire for an industrial change and for manufacturing, and at the same time a sustained environment that we can leave to our children and their children's children in the second half of the century.
Indeed. The cost of data in South Africa that cropped up in the president's speech, and he directed the regulators to essentially deal with the spectrum allocation problem, which the telcos say is the reason why data prices in South Africa are so damn high. Will this cure this price problem, or, and just as importantly, do the proposed remedies go far enough?
Well, you know, part of the cause has been stuff that was not addressed by the communications minister in the previous administration, Faith Mutambi, and that had to do with going directly against African National Congress policy, despite that being the policy of the party and not being implemented in government. What I think we're seeing with data costs is, you know, better regulation of the mobile operators, as well as the technical infrastructure needs to be provided. But this is not just the South African problem. It is also to do with the inequality in the country, so that the large numbers of people who can be exploited by high data costs but are dependent on those, the data in order to make a life every day, that has to be changed. And so this is a bigger problem than is simply a matter of getting the operators in line and regulating their conduct. It's also about making sure that South African citizens and those who live here, all 58 million people who live here, benefit from a change that doesn't put profit over people.
Indeed. June has been a relatively decent month for the rand, with the local currency up by almost 3% against the dollar in the last 4 weeks. But Following yesterday's speech, with all the things that you've mentioned, the lack of clarity on some specific policy issues, the fact that billions of dollars is going to go into Eskom again, do you think the currency can hold on to those gains?
Well, that remains to be seen, because the South African currency's value and its exchange is not just determined by the internal dynamic of the South African economy, but also and politics, but also by the international environment. And so it'll be interesting to hear what international investors and currency speculators think about the statements and the direction that President Ramaphosa suggests his government will take over the next few years, and whether or not they see that as necessarily being enough to change the dynamic in which they look at the currency in the short term. And let's not forget that credit ratings have come back in, and so the South African economy is in crisis, and the management of the South African economy is part of that problem. And the way in which the state-owned enterprises, particularly the now so-called too big to fail Energy Supply Commission, Eskom, is going to be dealt with over the next few weeks, not even months, that is going to be a crucial test for the Ramaphosa government. This is crucially about not only supplying energy sustainably, but also managing the way in which issues coming out of the State Capture Commission, the Zondo Commission, but also the Public Investment Corporation inquiry will have to be dealt with, because this has to do with how Eskom was central to the state capture issue in South Africa, by which state resources got hijacked and diverted. Not only does Mr. Ramaphosa suggest that has to be reversed, but the money has to be recouped, and those who were implicated have to be prosecuted. Some of the people who've been implicated in it, people whose names have come up in these commissions, sit inside the African National Congress benches in Parliament and have just been given positions as chairs of committees inside Parliament. And so whether or not the party and Mr. Ramaphosa's government pursue those people should their names come up will be a test for the African National Congress as a party and for the government that it has formed under Mr. Ramaphosa.
Indeed, it's quite the Herculean task, isn't it? One last question for you, Angelo. So the country also aims to attract, in the president's words, 21 million tourists in another 11 years. And he actually name-checked China and India as key target markets by name. But the country's visa policies are often cited as a significant barrier to tourists from within Africa. Are there any planned reforms on that front?
Well, that is going to be the test for the new Minister of Home Affairs, and the idea is that so much of what has gone wrong in the 8 years of the Zuma administration will have to be undone, and then their consequences will have to be addressed. And the visa policy is one issue, but there's also a kind of skills and capacity issue in the tourism industry in South Africa, because so much of it is geared in its imagination towards Europe and the Anglo-Saxon North, when actually the majority of tourists who come to South Africa come from the continent and from other spaces. And so reorienting the kind of understanding of tourism and its clientele and what their needs and desires and wants may be, that's going to be crucial. And then also the infrastructure issues. South Africa is a water scarce and water insecure country, and with global climate emergency issues beginning to hit the continent, the question of how South Africa will cope with 21 million arrivals in the next 11 years, in terms of water supply, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of services, in terms of delivery, that's going to be crucial as a test, because this idea that South Africa was the darling of the world for the period between 1994 and 2000, because of the Mandela factor, that is no longer there. And so how South Africa not just markets itself, but treats the people who come here and understands the way in which that works, not just as government, but as the private sector and as the trade sector more generally, that's going to be a test over the next 10 years if Mr. Ramaphosa's vision of expanding tourism in South Africa is to be achieved.
Indeed. Well, he's laid out the targets. Let's see if he actually can hit them. Angelo Fick in Johannesburg. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Now, on to West Africa. Cote d'Ivoire has hosted the Tourism and Hotel Investment Conference in Francophone Africa. The event connects business leaders from the international and local markets who are driving investment in hotel development across the continent. CGTN's Brian Toussaint reports.
Several themes have been discussed at this year's edition of the Tourism and Hotel Investment in Francophone. Delegates here hope to optimize private sector interests in the sector.
In terms of hotel development, I believe there is an enormous potential in Africa, but the most important thing is to carry out the projects. However, many projects are on standby with the risk that the development and implementation of these projects may take a long time or even that they may never come to fruition. It is nevertheless important for the development of the hotel sector in Africa that all these projects are carried out.
Any investor who comes to ask for our support is generally welcomed. However, while conducting business, it's essential that the investor agrees to be accompanied by professionals in the hotel business. This is a requirement to guarantee the security of our investment.
Various objectives were set, including exchanging experiences and creating synergies to remove obstacles faced in the tourism and hotel sector. Security risks have in recent years contributed to the decreasing number of international tourists coming to Africa.
The hotel sector is clearly a priority target for these terrorist groups. It would therefore be important, and I think it is already the case for the actors in the hotel sector to become aware of this risk, its evolution, and the dynamics that characterize it. This requires measures to secure the perimeter of hotels, access and control of people entering them.
Hotels are an interesting asset class that is perfectly suited to institutional investment because it does not present a very high risk profile. It has specialized funds, important local bills that diversify from real estate to hotels. In a nutshell, money is available. What is needed is good projects.
Experts say the number of tourists remains very low in the region. 3 countries in West Africa have, however, stood out with high tourism growth rates. These include Nigeria in first place, Senegal coming in second, and Côte d'Ivoire in third. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Right then, in our company news wrap, let's start in East Africa, Kenya to be specific. Kenyans apparently living anywhere outside the country will have to bring their 1,000-shilling notes for exchange with the new currency before the October 1st deadline. The country's central bank has ruled out any kind of conversion of these old notes outside Kenya's borders, saying that the measure will effectively defeat its objective of trying to deal with illicit money flows. The regulators notified all foreign banks to stop recognizing the legacy currency by that date. Now, still in Kenya, 5 million young people across the country stand to benefit from a near $300 million program. The initiative is a public-private partnership between the MasterCard Foundation, the private sector, and Kenya's government. It will enable young people to get access to dignified and fulfilling work over the next 5 years. Africa's largest phone carrier by market value, Vodacom, is selling its units serving corporate customers in 5 African markets. The move is part of the firm's broader effort to focus its investments back in Europe, where it's looking at falling revenue and soaring wireless spectrum costs. And finally, the former CEO of Barclays, John Varley, has been cleared of fraud charges in regard to a 2008 deal with Qatar. Varley, along with other executives, were accused of conspiracy to commit fraud when raising capital for the bank at the height of the financial crisis. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at how South African enterprises are adapting to an ever-evolving digital era. We'll also be showing you how Tunisia plans to reevaluate and revamp its tourism sector.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Now, companies right around the world are switching up the traditional way in which business is done. And that's because many of their customers are going online for better, faster, more efficient transactions. Now, we know South Africa has seen a 25% year-on-year growth in the value of e-commerce transactions between 2017 and 2018. The country has a rather unique problem. The cost of data is just way too high. Now, while online transactions may be luring a growing number of customers, there's no denying that a significant amount of clientele, potential and actual, simply cannot afford to actually shop online. So then, let's find out exactly how this can be changed. Pontley is a director of Digital Plug. She joins us now live from Johannesburg with more on this story. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Let's start with Social Media Week in Joburg. In Durban, not Joburg. It took place not too long ago. What is your impression of the conversations, the ideas that came out of that?
Good evening to all the viewers and good evening to you as well, and thank you for having me on the show. Social Media Week was actually the second time happening in South Africa. For those who don't know, Social Media Week is actually quite a big experience and a global experience. So it happens in Nigeria, it happens in LA, it happens in New York. So for South Africa, we were quite happy to have it the second time around, as the first time it happened was, I think, in 2013. So with all the conversations that happened around Social Media Week, which was held in Durban, is how traditional has moved into the digital space and how most companies are emerging in all of that. You know, the conversations also happened around a lot of tech that is coming up, around the AI, the artificial intelligence, the geotagging, and how a lot of apps and search engines are tapping into making businesses a fruitful experience for the digital transformation as well.
Right, I'm going to get back to the data side of it in just a moment, but let's look at the big picture here, because some of the data that we've seen, 25% growth in the value of e-commerce transactions between 2017 and 2018, but there's a lot of untapped potential in e-commerce in South Africa. What's holding back online retail?
I think the one thing that a lot of people are very reluctant of in South Africa is that we just generally don't trust online shopping. And I think the online shopping comes from the payment methods, trusting brands as to how true brands are, selling themselves, and especially with the data costs as well. People are very reluctant to spend time searching for things that they like online and having to trust online shops as well, you know. So because it's a very new aspect into the digital transformation of South Africa, people are not sure where to go, you know. So people are very reluctant on social media as well, which is your Facebook, your Instagram and Twitter. And because those have always been conversational platforms for the South African economy, we don't know whether shopping online is the right thing to do, you know. With the e-commerce spaces that are booming, only now people are buying into the online shopping sprees, the online shopping space, and trying to grow their businesses as well from online. So even from traditional agencies or traditional businesses that have been in retail or have been very independent, they are then trying to explore the market and the audience that is online, because it is a bigger audience than your walk-ins that you have in your retail malls or your value centers or shops and anything of that nature.
What about the business side? I mean, when you talk to clients or clients walk into your door and you're trying to convince them, look, the future of your retail business is essentially online. Do they still struggle with that fear of the unknown instead of trying to move out and say, okay, yes, there are things here we haven't figured out yet, but we'll try and see what works. We'll experiment. We might fail a bit, but there's a lot to learn here.
With the online side, because a lot of organizations and a lot of businesses have millennials in them, I think the millennials are the ones that are helping with the transformation and helping the Gen Zs as well understand what digital is all about. We should remember that traditional doesn't speak to millennials, and millennials are always trying to do things differently. So you do have businesses that are struggling online because they either don't understand the processes, they don't understand what the outcomes will be, what their returns will be. And as much as we have all the data that's come out, whether globally or in South Africa, it's just numbers to them. You know what I mean? A lot of people also want to see what the immediate returns would be. But it also takes a lot of understanding that digital is not really about the immediate. Digital is about the consumer journey. It's about dealing with the personas, the type of, you need to understand who your buyer personas are, who your audience is, and what you're really selling to them, and how people actually land on either your pages or your adverts, you know, how people click onto your websites or your social media pages and all of that. So it is a customer journey that needs to start from the beginning, and making sure that organizations know that you can't really jump on in the middle, you know, and you're building a house and you're just putting on the windows. You do need to understand what the base is of where digital comes from, why organizations are going into the digital space, and how we actually grow from it, you know. So right. A lot are moving into the digital space, which is a good thing, and I'm happy with the emergence of how a lot of traditional agencies are also saying digital is the way to go, you know. So whether it's advertising, whether it's marketing, whether it's PR, everything is essentially moving into the digital world.
Right, one last question for you. Now that we're talking about the future of e-commerce, I'd like your thoughts on Facebook and its move into introducing Libra as a way of settling e-commerce transactions on its platforms, Facebook and Instagram as well. Because we both know in South Africa, in Kenya, there's a lot of informal transactions that happen over these platforms. But what are your thoughts on Facebook muscling into that sector?
I'm not too sure if I can trust the Facebook currency at the moment, but I know it is going under a lot of scrutiny right now, because it's a currency that's just come up. You know, we don't know where it comes from, we don't know why it's come up, but with Facebook being like the center of most social media platforms, you kind of just have the sense that they're trying to just centralize everything, you know, just make everything easy for the user. I mean, they did come up with Shopify as the e-commerce space and one of their shops that they use. Only now a lot of organizations and businesses are understanding what the e-commerce space is like, and because, like we said in our previous question, that the e-commerce space in South Africa is quite slow. So it will take a while for people to actually understand what the currency is about, why Facebook has started using that currency, and building the trust essentially. It also speaks to trusting Facebook as a brand, seeing that Facebook has been breaching data policies and giving out user data to all these apps and all these people that want it. You know, it's easily accessible. So people then want to trust that if I'm going to use the Facebook currency, does that mean they can then tap into my business account or my personal account? Will the world soon find out how much I earn, how much money I'm making? So there's a lot of questions around it as to why it's there, how it's going to work, and how it's actually going to grow the economy of e-commerce altogether.
Indeed. I don't think I can find a better way of ending the interview. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Much appreciated. For a deeper look there into, of course, the business of e-commerce in South Africa. Now then, let's move on to North Africa, Tunisia to be specific. Its direct contribution to GDP as far as tourism is concerned is usually calculated by measuring the sum of the added values achieved in the sectors all over the place. Now, it does exclude other areas directly related to tourism. Experts consider that the method adopted over there to calculate the value, the economic value of the tourism sector, doesn't actually reflect its real value, which employs over 1 million people. CGTN's Adin Chwachi has the details.
According to a study on the real position of the tourism sector in the national economy, carried out by the Tunisian government and the private sector, the direct and indirect contribution of Tunisian tourism to gross domestic product GDP is expected to reach 14.2% in 2019.
Over the past 3 years, we have invested massively in security to provide a favorable climate for boosting tourism activity. All European countries have lifted travel bans to Tunisia. Now, there are positive indicators.
The study showed that the sector's contribution, according to the new calculation method, is estimated at 13.8% of GDP for the year 2018, against a forecast of 6.72%. The government now aims to improve quality of service to further boost this vital sector.
We plan to develop tourism by implementing new reforms in training, quality of service, infrastructure and logistics. There is a new vision to increase tourism contribution to the GDP by attracting more tourists and diversifying activities, while creating jobs and developing inner regions.
Experts emphasize the need to settle for the direct effects of tourism when calculating indicators, but also indirect ones to determine the sector's position in the national economy.
The objective is to provide professionals with a dashboard to observe the evolution and efficiency of tourism in Tunisia. The crisis, which hit the country in the past, made tourism professionals fragile. Now, more hotels are opening. Tourism revival is underway.
Tunisian authorities say it is important to set up a calculation mechanism dedicated to the subsectors by bringing together all the components of tourism to highlight the overall value added of this sector, which employs 9.4% of the workforce.
In 2015, millions of European tourists deserted Tunisia following a wave of terror attacks. More than 60 civilians died in the Bardo Museum and the beach resort of Sousse. Now that the security situation is improving, the North African state aims to attract over 9 million tourists this season. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
On to the business of infrastructure now. The Nigerian section of the Trans-West African Coastal Highway, which connects the city of Lagos in Nigeria to Dakar in Senegal, right essentially on the tip of the Atlantic, it's in total collapse. The situation is now taking quite a toll on businesses between Nigeria and the neighboring republics of Benin and Togo. Residents in the area are also demanding urgent action on the state of the highway. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with that story.
It's difficult to believe this is the busiest international highway in Nigeria, but that is what it is. Also known as Badagry Road in Lagos, it is the major border route between Nigeria and Benin Republic, linking up with Togo, Ghana, and as far as Senegal. It's also a major trading route. But traveling on this road is a nightmare everyone loves to avoid, but hardly can. The road has been in this terrible condition for a very long time now. Many businesses along the corridor have collapsed as a result.
It has claimed lives. Industries are folded and some are still folding. We have recorded a series of accidents, insecurity, robbery. You will find out that in terms of tourism, a lot is not being done. And a road that up to September, 460 billion has been spent. So Badagry Way, which should serve as a leeway for business to thrive, has become a gateway of pain and anguish.
Joe Dumaki and her group have been holding series of rallies like this one to pressure the government to fix the road. They say the state of the road is a disgrace that shouldn't be allowed to continue.
We don't have any other choice but tell the government to declare a state of emergency. A sort of economic war is going on in Badagry. Our transporters, most of their vehicles have become rickety, and most of our market women cannot even sell a lot of the things that they produce as a result of bad roads. There is no government that can progress if a quarter of its population is left behind. We have up to 15 million people that reside in this axis of the country.
Extensive reconstruction of the 61-kilometer 10-lane expressway began in 2010, but a lingering funding challenge has compelled the contractor to stop work. Lagos state authorities now say the reconstruction work would soon resume.
The contractor will move into site before the end of this month. And I'm still relaying that in the month of June, where we should be closing out the discussions with the contractor over the weekend, early next week. And we're hoping that, barring any unforeseen circumstance, they should still be moving in another 2 to 3 weeks' time, meaning that the construction, the cleanup and the construction of the Badagry Express Road will return back in earnest.
The residents of Badagry and indeed the entire Lagos state would be holding the governor to account on that pledge. Bottom line is that how quickly funding is made available for the contractor to return to site would ensure that the road does not deteriorate further and add to the misery of the millions who still use it every day. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
It's 18:30 GMT, time for another break on the program. Here's what's coming up next. We'll look at the latest in the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. We'll also have the highlights of this year's Forbes Women's Summit held in New York. All that and more is in the pipeline.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's now turn our attention to the escalating tensions in the Gulf of Oman. The US President Donald Trump has confirmed reports barely 24 hours ago that he ordered an attack on Iran in retaliation for the downing of an American drone. But he then says he reversed his decision with just 10 minutes to spare, because apparently, he says, he was concerned about potential casualties. Let's get the latest on this developing story. Jim Spellman joins us now live from Washington, D.C. So then, as we speak, Jim, what's the latest on this story? What's the White House's next move?
Well, it's so unclear. There are camps within the White House that would like to see military strikes carried forward, and other camps, most importantly led by the U.S. President Donald Trump, who've said that this is not the time. To add a little detail to what you just said, President Trump tweeted this morning that he asked a general how many lives would be lost if the U.S. retaliated against that drone shootdown. He was told by a general, he says 150 people could be killed. He said that's not a proportionate response to the shooting down of this unmanned drone. So you're really seeing here this choice that the president has to make. He's repeatedly said he does not want to enter protracted foreign overseas wars, but at the other side he wants to appear tough. So at this point there's simply no good options to go forward with a military response. So the president decided to stand down. Unclear what will happen in the hours and days ahead and what will happen next in Iran. Ramah?
Indeed. So there are two very different competing narratives here on where this UAV was when it was shot down. But what's the evidence on offer from both sides, from the Pentagon and from Iran?
Right, so the Pentagon says that this drone was flying over international waters. Iran says it was in their airspace. Both sides have released maps, video, and charts and such, saying that it was in the position that both claim. At this point, it's simply not clear, but this is really important. This will have a lot to do with how the international community responds. Iran has aired footage, it says, is from debris from this shot down drone. They aired it on television. They say they will take some of that debris to the UN and make their case to the international community. Iran also says that it warned before shooting down this drone 4 times, and that there was also a nearby spy plane that had U.S. crew on it, and they purposely did not target that aircraft. They said that they were trying to do everything they could to simply protect their airspace, but to not go beyond that. I think a lot, again, will depend on what happens in the next 24 hours as to whether this situation calms down or heats up. Ramah?
Indeed, and of course it was shot down at 50,000 feet, quite a bit of area denial firepower there. But let's assume for argument's sake that this does escalate, because that is one possible path from this point on. What US assets in the region are at risk of retaliation by Iran?
Well, there are U.S. warships in the region. There's a destroyer called the USS Bainbridge, and also the USS Abraham Lincoln is in the region. That's an aircraft carrier. A more likely target may be commercial shipping. About 21 million barrels a day of oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Not much of that goes to the United States, but much of it is produced in countries that are allied with the U.S., Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So those ships could be targeted. The U.S. And some other countries have alleged that Iran has targeted a minimum of 6 of these ships in about the last month or so with mines. So it's possible that we could see more attacks like this. Earlier today, Friday, here in Washington, President Trump spoke with the Saudi Crown Prince to try to come up with a plan for the coming days as the tensions increase. Ramah?
I need one last question for you, Jim. So Iran this week also did say that it would be breaching one of the limits set out in the JCPOA, that's essentially the Iran nuclear deal, by growing its stockpile of enriched uranium. Now, the president says it's not acceptable, but once that limit is breached on the 27th of June, which is when the Iranian say it'll happen, what can or will he do?
Well, I think today you're seeing the reluctance to take any sort of military course of action. Since the U.S. pulled out of the JCPOA last year, what has happened is what the U.S. calls a maximum pressure campaign, what Iran calls economic terrorism, ever-increasing sanctions that make it more difficult for companies and countries outside of Iran to do business with Tehran. So I think that likely what we would see is just a ramping up of those sanctions. But if it gets closer to the point where U.S. analysts say or can make the case that Iran is getting close to having what it needs to create a nuclear weapon, that could indeed change the calculus here at the White House. Ramah?
Indeed, let's see how the math runs out. Jim Spellman in Washington, D.C., thank you very much. Now, President Donald Trump, his proposal for fresh tariffs has caught the attention of manufacturers and retailers in the outdoor recreation industry. The sector has held its largest U.S. trade show of the year this week in Denver, Colorado. So UTN's Hendrik Sirvandi was there to gauge the mood.
The core philosophy of the U.S. footwear brand Keen is pretty simple: to get people outside to play. This mini carnival outside the Colorado Convention Center drove home that point this week At the same time, perhaps more than ever, Keen's executives are focused on dollars and cents.
I have a big job. I manage global trade compliance for the brand, and I'm spending an inordinate amount of time worrying about tariffs in China.
Sarah Bowersox has lots of company. Across the street, many businesses attending this year's Outdoor Retailer Summer Market Trade Show have a story to tell about how U.S. tariffs on imports from China have affected them.
A trucker hat for us was $25, and now it can be $30 to $32.
Kay Martin runs Boko Gear, 90% of whose headwear is manufactured in China. She says tariffs, now at 25%, when added to existing import duties, have put the squeeze on her small firm.
Basically what it's doing is taking away profit.
The rounds of tariffs already imposed have been felt by some of these businesses, but not all. What really worries the industry is Round 4, or List 4, which covers products like tents, canoes, pants, and hiking boots, a big seller with the summer approaching. The Outdoor Industry Association claims that round, if implemented, together with a recent tariff hike, will cost the industry an additional $1.5 billion each month, a burden many say has to be shared.
Everybody's looking at, oh, can I take a little bit out here? You know, can I get a discount from my supplier? Can I take it out of cost in the supply chain and then pass a little bit on to the consumer, and then I eat a little bit?
This knife manufacturer says the unpredictability of the U.S. tariffs has hurt it most of all.
You know, we have to give notice to our retail partners if we're going to make any changes in our pricing. Consumers need notice as well, and it's hard to do that when there's uncertainty.
The most annoying is having it impact us by tweet.
Martin says moving her supply chain isn't an option. Her Chinese factory is just too valuable.
From talking to my factory, they are hurting, but so are we.
Having certainty in
nervous company reps packed a session at the trade show dedicated to the issue and the prospect of more tariffs.
Our highest tariff right now on some of our products at Columbia is 37.5%. If you tack on 25% onto that, you very quickly have a product that can't be sold at a profit, and American consumers are either going to pay the price or not get the product.
The thought of folks downsizing or canceling outdoor trips concerns Bowersox.
That's what I'm really afraid of, is that people are going to use the additional costs of stuff that they need to not do these things.
A potentially devastating blow, the industry says, to what is an $887 billion outdoor recreation economy. Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Denver.
China's head of state Xi Jinping has wrapped up a two-day state visit to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. President Xi and the leader of the DPRK, Kim Jong-un, hailed what they described as a new era of bilateral ties during their talks and they mapped out plans for future collaboration. CGTN's Wang Mengzhuan explains.
President Xi Jinping's first visit to the DPRK was the first by a top Chinese leader in 14 years. It's also the fifth face-to-face meeting between the two leaders in the last 15 months. After a warm reception by thousands of local residents, Xi and Kim sat down at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, where their talks focused on bilateral relations and regional concerns. The Chinese president stressed that Beijing is willing to offer assistance that could guarantee Pyongyang's appropriate internal security, while vowing to play an active and constructive role in maintaining peace on the Korean peninsula. Xi spoke highly of Pyongyang's efforts to push forward the denuclearization of the peninsula and calls for political settlement on the issue. Meanwhile, Kim says Xi's visit can help shape future relations and extend their unbreakable bond, just like one family. Kim added his country will remain patient regarding nuclear talks, even though the relevant party, with no name given, has failed to respond to his overtures. The meeting was followed by a welcome banquet and grand art performance. President Xi and his wife Peng Liyuan joined an audience of over 100,000 at the May 4th Stadium, watching a variety of performances including well-known DPRK art gymnastics, orchestras, and a number of Chinese songs. Before wrapping up the tour, President Xi also paid a visit to the China-DPRK Friendship Tower, built in 1959, a symbol of the two neighbors' long-standing friendship. Xi's trip comes as China and the DPRK mark the 70th anniversary of their diplomatic ties. At Friday's regular presser, the Chinese Foreign Ministry also spoke on the results.
This is a friendly visit and a very successful one. During his meeting with Chairman Kim Jong-un, President Xi clearly pointed out some key areas for the further development of DPRK relations, including close high-level exchanges, strengthening strategic communication, and deepening cooperation in practical areas. He also stressed the importance to communicate on governance and economic construction.
The trip ended with Kim and his wife bidding Xi's delegation a fond farewell at Pyongyang Airport, where Xi also reviewed the DPRK's honor guard before boarding. Wang Mengzhen, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, the Forbes Women's Summit has just wrapped up in New York. This year's theme was Leading with Purpose. The first keynote speaker, the annual event that celebrates female empowerment, was one of the most prominent women in finance. Christine Lagarde, head of the International Monetary Fund. CGTN's Karina Huber was there.
The 7th annual Forbes Women's Summit kicked off in New York with words by National Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman.
Where there's will, there's women. And where there's women, there is always a way.
Inspiration is what the Forbes annual gathering of female leaders is all about. The first to take to the stage was Christine Lagarde, head of the International Monetary Fund.
I think that there are three attributes, areas that you need to cultivate in order to be able to exercise leadership efficiently. And it boils down to confidence, energy, and generosity.
Lagarde was France's first female finance minister before becoming the first woman to lead the IMF. Her speech included a personal anecdote explaining how she developed the confidence to take risks.
My parents let me do crazy things when I was much younger. And in retrospect, and I discussed that with my mother before she passed, I said, how could you do that? And she said, well, we trusted you. We thought you would manage.
One of the key takeaways at this year's Forbes Women's Summit, and something that was reiterated by Christine Lagarde, is that women need to work together instead of seeing each other as competitors to tackle some of the world's most pressing problems and reach their full potential.
Actress Jennifer Garner talked about how the Me Too movement brought her closer to other female actresses like Natalie Portman and Jessica Chastain.
There is room, even though it's gnarly out there for women, there is room for everyone to have a place to shine. And so to be together and to feel the kind of the force of the other women with you when you have something going on is pretty great.
For female entrepreneurs, there's much to celebrate. In 2018, there were 12 companies founded by at least one female that hit the $1 billion valuation mark globally. 2019 is poised to top that record. Nevertheless, the editor of Forbes Women said female founders still face tremendous challenges.
I think more women are open to conversations with budding entrepreneurs, so it might be easier to get a foot in the door, but it's still hard to get that funding. It's still hard to scale. You know, you can get one customer, two, but how do you get to 10?
Events like the Forbes Women's Summit hopes to empower not just the women of today, but also the women of tomorrow. Karina Huber, CGTN, New York.
Right, and a quick run through commodity prices here for you. Now, Iran is really the broad meta context for everything you're about to see here. WTI crude, for instance, up again today, though not by the margin that we saw on the 20th of June, up about 0.8% just before 1600 GMT. Now, so far in June, it's actually gone up by 7%. Brent is up by a similar margin to about $65 a barrel. All of this is off the back of the tensions between Iran and the US. And when you've got risk, gold benefits. Strong performance in June so far, up 7.1% in the month. Most of those gains, though, for the year happened in just 4 weeks. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take you shopping in Durban to an outlet that's spicing up things for locals and tourists. And we'll also take a look at how this year's Afcon tournament will support Egypt's economy.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, Indian cuisine is renowned for its sophisticated and broad array of spices that give it a very unique taste. In the South African coastal city of Durban, a small Indian spice shop is enriching homes of locals and tourists alike with a massive selection of aromatic spices, and it brings a soothing, nutritious quality to all cuisines. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the details on Grassroots tonight.
A visit to the Spice Emporium in Durban is filled with the distinct aromas of Indian cooking. It started out as a little spice shop in the 1940s, but became known as the Spice Emporium when it opened its doors during the height of apartheid in 1985.
Those things had come down with the indentured laborers when they came down in 1860. So they had brought that culture into this country. So somebody had to keep that culture alive also. And we were the pioneers in bringing spices to the country in the early days and creating this whole feel of using ethnic food.
Demand grew in tandem with the Indian population. Spices were traded mainly from Asian and African countries.
So our importations used to come from all parts of the world. It used to come from India, it used to come from Singapore, come from Hong Kong, come from Colombo. Spices are specific to countries. Each country has got its specific weather and atmospheric issues, the way things will grow. You can't just take cumin and grow it somewhere here in Isitebe.
The local spice merchant expanded its footprint to Johannesburg, but the original store still remains a unique experience for tourists. For the locals, it's a nostalgic trip back to Mom's kitchen.
The taste, it brings back memories when we were younger. And obviously the spices that we put in our foods. It's only today that they're finding out a lot of the spices that we use in our food is for health benefits.
Big range here always attracts us. Whenever we come to Durban, we have to make a trip to come and do some shopping at the Spice Emporium.
The company has become an important contributor to jobs in the Durban CBD, employing staff mainly from previously disadvantaged communities.
All the staff are so highly trained in a sense that they can advise you also. Certain of them can advise you on what to eat and how to make up a meal, how to make a biryani, how to make a beans curry, how to make a mutton curry, everything they know about.
The Emporium is part of a $28 million upliftment project to create a Durban Spice Quarter. It may be a long way off from mirroring the great spice markets of the world, but it will help rejuvenate some parts of the inner city which have fallen into ruin. Julie Shire, CGTN, Durban, South Africa.
And finally, this year's Africa Cup of Nations gets underway in 6 stadia across 4 cities in Egypt in a matter of hours. The tournament is Africa's biggest single sporting event. It will see the participation of 24 teams for the very first time. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim explaining how this event will benefit the North African economy.
There are multiple sources of income expected from the Afcon 2019. The African Football Federation usually allocates 20% of the competition's revenue to the host nation. However, some experts believe Egypt should receive a higher percentage this year.
It's quite unfair for the host nation to gain only 20% of the total revenue. First, the number of teams have increased from 16 to 24, which means more expenses for preparing the tournament. Second, Egypt has taken over the cup after Cameroon withdrew from hosting. It had only 4 months to prepare for it, and it's a very short period to market the tournament. So at least the federation should raise Egypt's share from the income.
Besides the stadia, the basic infrastructure such as accommodation and transportation links for the tens of thousands of fans has been up to scratch in record time. The cost has exceeded the expected $25 million.
Egypt has spent so much in such a short period to ensure the organization is at the highest quality. So the $25 million forecast by the African Federation is much lower than the actual expenses. But Egypt knew, when offered to host the tournament, that the financial rewards will not be so high. Such a big tournament in Egypt would send a positive image to the international community that Egypt is now safe and secure. People should come and visit.
The tourism sector is going to benefit as well. During their stay, African fans are expected to visit the famous ancient Egyptian sites in Cairo and other cities. A large chunk of revenue will come from advertisement, sponsorship deals, and a special sports channel, with local exclusive rights to the tournament. There are no details about the approximate revenue expected from Afcon 2019, although officials hope it would exceed the $35 to $40 million. And as important, the success of the tournament would be a good advert for Egypt abroad. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right then, a run through the currencies as we wrap up the program for you. So the Kenyan shilling still hovering around the just about 102 level, not really moving much beyond that point. 101.8 was a relevant number for today. The rand, however, more or less flat in today's trading session, especially towards the later end, not moving past 14.33 to a large extent, especially in the wake of the State of the Nation address by the President. A Reuters poll of economists out today, though, indicating that the market's expecting a rate cut either next month or in September, in part because of much lower economic growth. The forecast for the year now is about 0.6%. You're looking at a potential 25 basis point cut, but will the South African Reserve Bank agree with that? We'll find out. That's it for tonight's edition of the program. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.